Hello. More technical difficulties between Riverside and LinkedIn Live. So here we are, Net Zero Hero, cracking your carbon calculations conundrum. My name's Mark Woods, and hopefully for the next 45 minutes, hour or so, I'll be talking to you about net zero stuff. So on the call around us, we have Joe, who's going to be posting some polls along the way. So if you can ask any questions, put them in the chat. She's going to be asking some questions and there'll be a bit of feedback, hopefully, at the end. And we have Katie, who is our presentation queen, really. So she's managing the Riverside studio. So there's a little bit of delay between the studio and actually getting it out live to you guys. So one slide about us. Our mission is helping ambitious owners become great leaders by delivering better strategies, better systems, better measurement and engaged people, hopefully delivering some better results. Better systems obviously being a core part of ISO 14064 and 8 and net zero stuff. So, objectives agenda for today, really to provide a little bit of an understanding about the drivers of this net zero stuff, a little bit of the history, and those two things kind of bleed into one another a little bit. Then we're going to discuss some of the different scopes, or we're going to discuss the three different scopes, and then dig into a couple of the scope 3 examples, which are normally the more knotty area. And then so signpost you to resources overall. So the overall objective is really we want to help you reduce the hassle of this net zero stuff. So, because at the end of the day, we want to help you engage your people to help you improve your systems so that you save time, energy and money, because that's really what a system ought to be about. So first off, the question is, what on earth is net zero for some of you? And that's really about balancing the carbon that we kick out as a set of species and offsetting that with what the earth can absorb. There is a more technical explanation of net zero here, and it's the UN definition, no less. Bit of history then. This fella, this guy called James Lovelock, you might have heard of something called the Gaia hypothesis, that basically he formulated in the 60s and wrote about and published papers and books and things in the 70s, where he said Earth is basically that single cell organism, and we need to treat it and balance it so that we get to that net zero. The balance of what we kick out marries with kind of what the earth can absorb. All-round good fella, I would say. Some 20-odd years later, the UN, first time in, I think it was 1992, published their framework for climate change. Then came along a guy called Nick Stern. He was then professor, is now Lord Nick Stern. And he said, basically, the more we do now, earlier in the process, which again was some 20 odd years ago, the more we do now, the less it's going to cost. If we leave it till later, the more it's going to cost. And that was written in a big book called the Stern Report. It's about 400 pages, but that's predominantly the summary of it. The more you do earlier, the less it's going to cost you later. And then there was the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and they will become important because they are beginning to appear in tenders, which is, I'm guessing, where many of you are going to see the driver for this hit you. And we've got an example of a tender that uses some of those 17 development goals, most of which, if you cut them up, are climate change related in some way or another. I think 7 of the 17 is the biggest chunk of them, depending if whether you count kind of water as a goal. So the history, people will have heard of the Kyoto Summit and the Copenhagen Summit and the Paris Summit. So these are the COPs, the conferences of parties that are held every year. The big one is the Paris agreement, because that, for the first time, only 11 years ago, set mandatory government targets in legal stone, if you like. So Paris is the big one, but the others you might have heard of as well. That then bled out into, in the UK at least, various regulations. There is the ESOS regulation that was published in 2015, so that's the Energy Savings and Opportunity Scheme. And then a few years later, there was the Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting regulations. Both of those apply to slightly different types of companies, but typically if you've got turnover more than 36 million, if you've got more than 250 staff, and if you've got a balance sheet of, I think it's 18 million or more. So there were the rough numbers when it came out, and they've kind of edged up slightly since then. But typically the bigger companies, you must then have to do various carbon reporting stuff of one type or another. That in turn has led to some standards. So the big daddy is the Science Based Target Initiative Corporate Net Zero Standard. We're going to see a picture of that in a moment. There is also, or there was something called PAS 2060, which is published in 2010. That's really been taken over now by ISO 16064. There was ISO 50000, which was published in 2011. 6.4 and 6.8 are the ones that... 6.4 is the guidance for how to calculate carbon emissions, and ISO 6.8 is the standard that you would get approved to be certified as net zero. There is also something called PAS 2080 if you're in building and highways particularly, which is about the carbon emissions of buildings and infrastructure. So all of those may or may not be of interest to you. There is also something coming, which is PAS 14060, which is, we have been informed by people like BSI and NQA, they think that is going to become the 9,000, if you like, the mandatory requirement for carbon emissions generally, and that's due to be published later this year. So that's one to look out for. This is what the Science Based Target Initiative looks like. So if you go and, I think there's the link here that we've put on here. If you go and search for this, this is the second version, and it's currently in draft, and it again is to be updated later in the year. The others, should you want to go and look for them, look like this. So PAS 2060, as I say, that's been jettisoned now, overtaken by 14064, and probably ought to come off this slide from that perspective as well. So this is what they look like. So any questions on standards or anything like that, put those in the chat before we move on to tenders, and then we can have a chat about those later. Tenders then, all sorts of tenders, or there might be a number of you that are getting driven by tenders and being asked from difficult questions as part of the tender responses that you need to make. And tenders are going to come from central and local government, blue chip organisations and the NHS. So if you're dealing with those people, they have this net zero stuff in their sights. Let's have a look at a tender. So this is part of a tender application that one of our clients had to fill out. Now there's a boatload of information there. We're not going to look at that. You'll get copies of this later, obviously, so we're going to expand it a little bit so we can have a look at a little more detail. So down the side here you will see the number 13. That is the SDG goal against climate action. Against that climate action SDG goal, there is a framework or a protocol. Against that, there are some guidance notes. Against that, there are some questions. And then over on the right-hand side, there are boxes that you need to fill in. So that's the SDG goal 13. There is also information against SDG goal 12. And again, same, which is about responsible consumption and production. You've got the same framework, some same notes, just questions and stuff that you need to fill in. And that looks like this. This was a 5-year tender that they were looking to secure an organisation to provide this information, but not just one number against all of those things. Each number for for each of the 5 years that particular contractor would have had the contract. That's a big ask, but that's the types of stuff that we're beginning to see in tenders. This is probably the most detailed one we've seen, but you know, to win this tender, somebody's going to need to fill this out. So, any questions? And put those in the chat before we move on to scopes. So this is a diagram, and the source here is referenced. It's the technical guidance for Scope 3. It's a diagram taken from, I think, page 6 from that. And it talks about direct Scope 1 emissions, which are really, think about Scope 1 as anything you burn. Scope 2 is any electricity or power that you consume to heat and put into your factories or offices, buildings to keep people warm. And Scope 3 is everything else. Scope 3 is the big daddy. So what are the definitions for these things? Scope 1 and 2 are relatively easy. A day we can get you some Scope 2 numbers from data that you are likely to have. So Scope 1 emissions is about results directly from your operations. Think about it, anything you're burning. So that's typically gas and fuels. Scope 2 is any electricity produced by others that you're buying in some way. So they're the easy ones. Probably half a day's work, depending on how big your organisation is and how complex your organisation is. But for most, you know, if we're not talking about massive corporates and things. Scope 3 is the harder bit, and that's split into, you'll remember from that diagram, 2 sections. There's an upstream section, so that's all the stuff that you buy and it comes into your organisation before you then stick stuff out of the door, whatever stuff that is for you. So we're talking about all the purchased goods and services. We're talking about capital goods that you may have. Cars might fit into, or cars, vans, fleets, that type of thing. You might treat that as a purchase good. You might treat it as a capital good. Certainly things like equipment for companies that have got manufacturing, they've got bits of CNC machine or whatever, big bits of machine, that's the capital goods. I wouldn't worry too much about fuel and energy, not in Scope 1. Most people don't have to worry about that. Upstream transportation and distribution. Now that may be, depending on how you calculate your numbers, that may be part of purchased goods and services, may be separate. We'll go into that in a bit more detail in a minute. Waste, business travel, employee commuting, relatively easy to calculate. So that's the upstream stuff. Let's have a look at the downstream stuff. Transportation and distribution again, but this time the carbon calculations arising for the transportation of stuff that you then send to your clients. The processing of sold products, the use of sold products. If you're, for instance, a lift manufacturer or a manufacturer of PCs and devices, you've got to account for the stuff that's gone out of your door and the energy that consumes, or that particular item consumes, in for the life of the product. And then there's the end of life treatment of products. What happens, again, if you go back to lift manufacturers, some of that gets recycled. So there's stuff that you can take back off your target because of that recycling activity. The numbers can come down. There's also downstream leased assets, franchises and investments. We haven't yet come across a company where we've had to deal with those, so they're probably less relevant. So you don't have to necessarily do everything in this instance. Any questions before we move on to useful help? Now this is quite interesting, so put them in the chat, because there was a guy that used to run America. He was called Ronald Reagan, and he said the most terrifying words in the English language are probably "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Contrary to what Mr. Reagan said, or President Reagan said, there are two very cool bits of help that our government has produced, and we're going to have a look at those now. So this is a lovely little spreadsheet with thousands of numbers on it, and one of the things that we're really looking to do when we look to calculate our net zero emissions is play Hunt the Number. So that's a pretty daunting spreadsheet, but it actually becomes quite simple quite quickly. You'll notice there are some red bits on here. We're going to have a look at those in a bit more detail. Oh, and the reason I've deliberately put the title in here, because if you cut and paste that, you'll find this spreadsheet relatively easy, and I've put the source down the bottom actually. So if I go back, you'll notice that covers a period of years. We're only interested in a year at a time. So if we just eliminate the year, we've got the year we're interested in down the right hand side, and we've got, this is organised by SIC code, so I've just taken a few here. Wearing apparel. This was taken from a company that bought various items of clothing, fleeces, jackets, trousers, t-shirts, all the rest of it, for their workers that were working out in the field. You'd look at the number of from your calculations from the accounts package, you'd find the value of that you'd spent on wearing apparel and printing and recording services and computer and electronic and optical products and machinery and equipment, and you would then multiply that spend by the number on the right hand side. Hey presto, you have done your carbon calculations using information from your account system and marrying that with the carbon calculation conversion factors. The second, really rather daunting spreadsheet, again from the government, is the greenhouse gas reporting conversion factors spreadsheet. This is updated, like the other one, every year. So each year this gets updated and somebody goes through and kind of works out what the carbon conversion factors are because of other changes in our system. For instance, 50% of our energy now is created not from coal anymore, but from wind power and renewable sources. So the carbon conversion factor comes down across a range of different activities. Now, the beady-eyed amongst you will have noticed that there are a few tabs on the bottom of the spreadsheet. I think there are about 12 here in different colours. There are another few here, and there are another few here. So I think there are 34, 36 tabs in total. There's an awful lot of data in here, and the data behind each of those tabs looks something like this. So we are still playing Hunt the Number. I've taken the cars section here, and we can organise, depending on how much you know about your cars that you have in your fleet. Some people know more than others. You can choose just to kind of calculate cars by market segment, and there's minis and super minis and lower medium size and upper medium size or executive saloons. Or you can just say, well, I've got so many small cars, so many medium cars, so many big cars. Or I can just say that this is the average car, and I'll use the average number. So this isn't a science in the same way that perhaps accounting is. Sometimes it's a best guess, but it is finding the number. That's the key, and there's a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of tabs to work through. what are the lessons, limitations and warnings here? So we were doing some work with a medium-sized company, I would say, and they build some rivers and coastal defences. So they're using loads of concrete and loads of steel. And the steel is of different types. It could be mild steel, which they protect in some way from the elements. It could be stainless steel. So we went looking for a number for the different types of stainless and carbon steels that they might use. In those spreadsheets we found one number for metal. So it didn't really matter whether it was gold, silver, platinum, mercury, any type of stainless or carbon steel, there was one number for metal. So whilst there is a huge amount of numbers in those spreadsheets, they're not all there yet. Point being, your best guess is then okay, but you've got to justify it. So we went looking and we found some data that was put together by a local authority in Winnipeg. They not only had the numbers for different types of steel, they also had the numbers for whether or not it was recycled. So you might need to blend the numbers that the government give you with others that you have to go and hunt for. But your best guess is okay, but you need to justify your guess. Another thing is on a recent assessment, and this was with a big construction company that had a sustainability department. They had created a pretty impressive, I have to say, database in the back end of which they'd put all the conversion factors. But at assessment, fortunately it wasn't us, at assessment we found, it was BSI that were doing the assessment, they found that 30% of those numbers were taken from the wrong part of those spreadsheets. So we were told that we ought to be confident with the sustainability department. Fortunately, it didn't end up with egg on our face, it ended up with egg on theirs, and for that reason they will remain nameless. So it could be argued that actually some of this is about the law of diminishing deception, because I can guess, I can justify my guess, but on the transition to net zero, there is a desire for you to get better and slicker and quicker with the kind of the data that you're providing. So the objective is to get a number, learn from it, and then do something with it, I would say. Any questions before we move on to examples? Chuck them in the chat. So, let's have a look at scope 1. This is real data from a real company. They had different types of fleet, so they had people that had company cars, they had people that they had a grey fleet, they had big diggers and dumpers and that sort of thing, so it was a construction company. And each month they would log their spend, turn the spend into litres, and then turn the litres using a different carbon conversion factor into kilowatts, and then over on the right hand side all of those kilowatts were added up and turned into a carbon number month by month. That's what they did for all of their different types of vehicles, some of which came from All-Star, some of the data came from All-Star, came from expenses and different things. So we're tracking that monthly. Very simple, very easy if you've got that data. Electricity, very similar thing. Again, tracking by month. We're looking at gas and electricity, and we're converting that into kilograms using the various kilograms of CO2 using the various carbon calculation factors. Let's have a look at purchase goods and services and how we've worked with that. And I'm going to give you two examples, both actually with the same firm, and the two different ways that we ended up looking at that. This is the first approximation. So we got a group of directors, we threw them in a room and we brainstormed all of the products that we purchased, so that we had a consistent set of products that were purchased across all three divisions of this particular organisation. We knew that different people would be producing different things, or by purchasing different things in the different divisions, but they were all doing very similar things, but they had different purchasing priorities. So the key was to get a whole list of all of them, so that when we built the data, that would be a consistent set of data across all of the divisions, which we could then total easily. We then looked at things like, I'll show you the spreadsheet. So they were buying electronic stuff of one type or another, or electrical and mechanical stuff. They might buy packages of stuff, and they might buy control systems and flexes and floor selectors and car top controls. There was a series of mechanical packages, and there was a series of safety components, and we looked at how many of each of those each division was creating. We then looked at how many jobs there were per annum and the number of items for each of those jobs. We then looked at the primary materials, we looked at the volume of them, we looked at found a carbon conversion factor, we looked at the source, so we codified the source, and then we threw a boundary around where we were going to measure the carbon calculation from. And the boundary in this instance was from the UK point of the UK supplier. We've done this with another company, and they import charcoal from all over the world, and they have decided to actually calculate the carbon from the original source. So it doesn't matter whether the charcoal comes from, I don't know, India, or a lot of it comes from Namibia and Africa and places in South America and the like. They've taken it further back. That's your choice, and that would be kind of defined as part of the scope of your agreement with whatever certification or verification agency that you went with. So that's a way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to extract, as I've already hinted, information from your accounts data. You'd then arrange that by SIC code and look at something called the 2080 rule. I'm sure many of you heard of that, Pareto analysis, and you'd say, I've probably got a massive list of things that I've purchased over the last period that I'm looking at, let's say year, but it's going to take me forever to categorise all of that against an SIC code. So you'd say, well, I'll take the 20% of spends that make up 80% of the value, and you'd categorise those, and then you'd say, well, the other 80% only make up 20% of my value. I'm going to deal with slightly differently. Let's have a look at what that looks like. So here is electrical equipment being purchased, and there's 4 million quid's worth of electrical equipment being purchased, and we found all the big suppliers of electrical equipment, put them in a spreadsheet like this. So I've removed the names of the guilty to protect the innocent, if that makes sense, and these guys were providing things like controllers and components and motors, electrical stuff of one type or another. We multiply the spend by the carbon conversion factor. And we did that for building and construction works, for other stuff, different types of components that they were buying. We grouped, and we found the carbon conversion factor and simply multiplied the spend by the conversion factor to get the CO2 emission. Commuting, and we've done this a number of different ways. For the company that had about 40 people making river and defence, making stuff for river and defences, out of big bits of steel and concrete, we knew that they only had 40 staff. We knew where they lived. It was dead easy to create a spreadsheet in half a day or whatever that said, these are the staff, this is where they live, this is how far they travel every day, this is the car that they drive, this is the kilograms emissions for that particular car, multiply, get a number. On another company, bigger company, £75 million turnover company, they've got a load of people that have got company cars and vans and things like that. So we we knew how many company cars and vans they had. We subtracted that from the total number of staff, and we said, well, it's a big job to go round 100 odd people and find out where they all live and get all that information into a place where we can process that. Let's go to Mr. Google, and this was before AI, so let's go to Mr. Google. We'll tap into Mr. Google. What's the average commute in the UK? And it was, I think it was 19.7 miles. We said, let's call it 20. We'll just average that and multiply it by the number of staff that we have, and we came up with 1.2 million miles commuting. Multiply that by the number that is actually in the government spreadsheet. We're going to get better and slicker at that because they're just having an adjustment to their IT system that will allow them to calculate and know whether people are coming by public transport, whether they're cycling. So there's adjustments being made to the systems that they've got to get a better grasp of that number. So, as my point was earlier, best guess is sometimes okay, you just need to justify it. Use of sold products. So one of these companies where we're showing some data is a lift company. This is a picture of their lift in their building. The use of sold products then is you could do that a number of ways. Yeah, but the question might be asked, how long does a lift last? Well, there's probably lifts in some places that are maybe probably not 100 years old, but maybe 80 years, maybe 100 years old. You could do it by traffic analysis on all of your lifts. There will come a point in time when that information is available that isn't available at the moment. So we said, well, we've got typically 3 different types of lifts. We've got a 650 kg lift, we've got a 1000 kg lift, and we've got a 2000 kg lift. Let's take information from that, from the motors and control equipment that we've got from the manufacturers, and let's multiply that up by an average of how often we think that a lift of that type might typically work. So again, it's best guess. It's not like accounting. It's not a science. What does all that look like? Well, this is a GHG data report. It was one that was submitted to BSI. I've again removed the names of the innocent. Let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. So here we've got the different categories, and there is a template for this report. This is not something that we've invented. The template for this report is in the back of ISO 14064. So we would we have collected all of the numbers for all of these categories. So there's 5 or 6 items for category 1 there's a couple for category 2, and they would appear in the total column, and there would be spreadsheets behind this report that put in that key data. So along with the actual report itself, so that's the numbers, and there's a total down the bottom, along with that comes a report that also has to be submitted. This, you can see, is 26 pages long, so it's not a 150-page report. It's not like some of the technical documentation that you might see around this, but it's a relatively substantial report. And again, the chapter headings for this are defined in the 14064 standard. So get a copy of that, or nick this as a reference point and use that for producing the report in which you would justify the method that you've used to calculate the particular scope and the calculation, and the references that you've used for your carbon conversion factors. So that's what they look like. The question then becomes perhaps, is it verification that we want, or is it certification? There is a difference. So 14064 seeks to verify your numbers. 14068 is a standard to which you can get certification having had your numbers verified in accordance with 14064. So 14068 is the transition to net zero standard, and as I say, you can get certification against that. But one of the things that you need to do with 14068 is you need to confirm that you are at net zero with removals and offsets. Now, removals and offsets cost an amount of money, and depending on how big you are, it also depends on the balance between offsets and removals. Removals cost more than offsets, and there are specific places. The UN site is one where you can go and find and buy offsets and removals. We haven't had anybody yet go for the management system. They've built the management system, and these have been bigger companies. But when we did the calculation to find out how much the offsets and the removals were going to cost, it was, you then have to, if you're going to go for the certification, you have to get yourself to net zero, and that was going to cost them 40 grand a year for each of the years that they would gradually reduce their scopes over time, but it's probably going to take them 10-15 years, and they were going to be paying 40 grand a year for that privilege. So they decided, we're going to stick with verification. We're not yet going to go for certification. We're going to get our numbers down first and then offset when it doesn't cost as much. So that's something probably to consider, especially for kind of larger companies. So the assessment bodies, they are typically the NQAs, the BSIs, the BVQIs, the TUVs. All of those big guys are doing both verification and certification at the moment. So it's mainly the bigger bodies. There are also 2 stages. So actually, probably 2 weeks ago, we did the second round on a company that's already gone through once against 14064. The verification stage is really about, let's make sure that you've got the right numbers, they're in the right ballpark, they're kind of there or thereabouts. So that's stage 1. Stage 2 is actually, let's dig into those numbers and make sure they are absolutely correct so that we can write a verification statement against you. We're doing that with NQA. So it's a £75 million turnover company. The stage 1 was half a day, so it's just checking. Stage 2 for this £75 million company is going to be 4 days. And it's the second time we would have been through that process with that particular company. So it's quite a meaty interrogation of the data, and it is an interrogation of the data, making sure everything is correct. So let's have some good news. You know, people talk about net zero and all of this stuff, but is it actually having any impact? It's probably quite a good question to ask. Well, the World Economic Forum talk about 8 hard-to-abate sectors. So they're things like agriculture and shipping and mining's in there, I think. There's 8 hard-to-abate sectors. They have created what they call the First Movers Coalition, where people that are interested in net zero do good stuff to help those 8 hard-to-abate sectors. So as a for instance, did you know that Maersk, the big shipping agency, and I need to look this up because they had, I suspect they're on the high seas now, but they had 25 ships running methane engines on order. And that was probably 18 months ago. They may be on the high seas, I need to look it up. But 25 ships, that's quite an investment in a completely new engine-driven technology, and one close to my heart because some of you may know that I started life in the Merchant Navy. On another aspect, on good stuff, there is a company called X-Links. They have a little tiny project in Morocco. That little tiny project is to create a wind farm and a solar farm as big as Greater London, and then pipe the energy of that solar and wind project back to the UK through a little piece of electrical string, wire basically, some cable that will run under the sea. That project alone, they reckon, is going to provide 8% of the UK energy needs. That's got planning approval. That's pretty cool, I think. And JCB, we do a lot of work with construction companies. Being in the Merchant Navy, I have a particular love of engines, and JCB, probably 18 months ago, released their first hydrogen engine. This is not a hydrogen fuel cell, this is a hydrogen engine running on hydrogen, so an internal combustion engine running on hydrogen. Jeremy Clarkson, I'm sure, will be very pleased. So that's some good news. But what does that actually mean? Where are we now? Well, the UK is now at less than 50% of its 1990 carbon emissions levels. China now adds more renewables to its grid than the rest of the world put together. The US is down 3% on their 1990 levels, but 15% down on their 2007 peak. Is it enough? Don't know. Is it good news? I think it certainly is, and you don't hear this stuff in the news. So there's a guy that writes for the FT called Simon Cooper. Some of you might know about him. Lives in France, so he's a journalist. And there was an article in the FT over the weekend saying the prices that he wrote, saying the prices of solar panels have dropped 95% since 2007. Battery storage costs have plunged 93% since 2010. All of this has got to be good news. And in that article, he said, nothing is ever a panacea, not even solar, but there are theoretical ways to cut carbon, and three theoretical ways, and two have failed: international agreements and individual sacrifice. That leaves our last chance. Green is cheap tech that's so efficient that everyone adopts it for selfish reasons, and that's finally here. Good news. If you want more good news, there's this guy, Paul Pullman. He used to run a little tiny company called Unilever, so not exactly somebody that you would call an ardent tree hugger. Unilever, obviously one of the most respected brands in the world, and he says we ought not to be talking about net zero, we ought to be talking about net positive. And in that book, which is quite a readable book, it kind of lays out some of the foundations for that thinking. So he's very positive, and if he's positive, so am I. Any questions before we move on to the next bit? Chuck them in the chat. So if we've gone through a lot of information here, and there's a download, a dump at you of stuff that you can do. If you would like us to kind of help you take this to the next stage, we're more than happy to set up a Teams call, sort some kind of tailored diagnostic, and help you move on your way to net zero. If you'd like to do that, chuck that in the chat, and we will have a chat at some point. Send us an email or whatever. So, in summary, I would say some of the hard work's been done. There is no single one way of creating any of your numbers. There is a multitude of ways. 14064 and 68 provide frameworks, as will 14660, which I'm guessing won't be radically different. And at the moment, I'm failing to see kind of why there is a difference between 64 certainly and 60, but that will, I'm sure, be revealed. None of it has to be 100%. You can miss bits out if they don't affect you or aren't relevant to you. You can absolutely make assumptions, and the job here really is to go get a number and then to refine it. So, my name's been Mark Woods. We're from Statius. Our mission is helping ambitious owners become great leaders by delivering better strategies, better systems, better measurement, and engaged people, delivering the bit that you're really interested in, the better results. Have there been any questions?
So we had a question earlier, which was which part of the carbon conundrum frustrates you the most?
Which part of the carbon conundrum? What? Sorry, the most?
What part of it frustrates you the most? And we had someone say the different calculators are giving me totally different results. What kind of things would you suggest? What kind of things do they need to look at?
I would pick one calculator and stick with that, because it's not necessarily about the number, it's showing progress over time. So if you're flip-flopping between different conversion factors, then that is going to give you a problem with showing improvement over time. So pick one set of conversion factors, and I guess it doesn't matter if the conversion factors are from different places, but just use those on an annual basis and keep consistent with those and any updates to those, because they should change. Something like waste, there's been a big drop in the waste conversion factor on the government on the government spreadsheets this year. It's gone from 20 something down to 6. So as long as you're using the same source for each of your calculations, I don't think it really matters. Any other questions?
Great. Looking at greenwashing and not knowing which labels to trust, are there any that maybe we should be looking out for, or any kind of signs that maybe someone is greenwashing?
I think the only fundamental way to avoid greenwashing is, at the moment at least, the 14064 and 14068, that there are certain, you can't just say I'm net zero. There are certain ways of saying I am net zero, and they are defined in 14064 and 68. So unless somebody has gone to the trouble, it's the Wild West. There's different classifications of what you can say about it. SBTI have got a different set of classifications, and they are different at the moment, actually, to the ISO ones. But there's been it was announced as part of the last COP, actually, that the greenhouse gas people, the greenhouse gas protocol people, and ISO are getting together to provide a combined set of definitions as to what you can and cannot say. So unless it's kind of defined by greenhouse gas people or science-based target initiatives, I think you're going to struggle.
Great. So what would, say, someone do if they found out their eco-friendly choice was actually a hidden footprint?
What would somebody do? I guess it depends on how important that is to that person.
That seems to be the questions in the chat, unless there were any sent earlier. I think that's it.
There was one or two that were sent earlier, and that was the kind of key ones were, how long does this stuff take? Well, that's a bit like how long's a piece of string take, or how long is a piece of string. It depends on things like, have you got the data available, and how many are you going to go just scope 1, scope 2, or are you going to dig deep into scope 3? If you're just doing scope 1 and scope 2, it's probably only a day's work if you've got the information available. And by that I mean information around fuel bills for your fleet, if you have a fleet, and certainly heat and electricity and light and things like that. So power stuff that you would get from either reading meters, which is a way of doing it certainly, or your bills. Obviously, bills are becoming better. Many providers for electricity are putting the carbon conversion numbers, the CO2 emissions, on the bills these days. Some are not there yet, so it depends. Scope 1 or 2, relatively easy, usually, couple of days. Scope 3 depends on the size of the beast that you're trying to, that's within the scope, if you like. So a bit more difficult. But you can probably get something in 3 or 4 months, something like that. Depending, that's not full-time work. That's using somebody like us on a visit with every couple of weeks or something. And the other question that got asked is, what's the difference between offsets and removals? Offsets are really about kind of replacing something, so wind with coal or something like that, or methane capture, that type of thing. And removals is actually taking carbon out of the atmosphere. So that's usually forests. That was hard, wasn't it? So tree planting and that kind of thing. But could be carbon capture. There is a difference in price, and quite a significant difference in price. But again, I'd go back to the UN website where you can see that kind of information. So, thank you very much for listening. If there's anything else that we can help you with, we would certainly be happy to do so. Give us a call. We're here. We're human. All we're going to charge you is a cup of coffee, and we might, if it's a Teams meeting, we'll pay for our own coffee. Thank you very much. Ta-ta.